We're here with Art Hunsberger. Art Hunsberger, is that right, Art?
It's author, actually my name is Author Thomas Hunsberger. It's Hunsberger.
Well, Art, how old are you?
How old?
How old are you?
I'm 98.
98. You're getting up there. So that means you were born in what year?
25, October the 15th, 1925.
Now, how far can you remember back?
I can remember back to probably the time that I was 4 or 5 years old,
Yeah.
6 years old, somewhere
All
like
right. And where did you live at then?
in Clifton, Virginia, on a farm 2 miles east of Clifton, Virginia,
Yeah.
in Fairfax County.
Yeah. Things were different in 1925 and 1930. And
So it was, yeah. It was living on the farm. It really didn't make too much difference as far as the depression was concerned.
no.
Because we grew our own wheat to make flour, and we'd take it to Manassas. And the first time that I went to Manassas was in a spring wagon when I was about 6 years old. My father and my oldest brother and my brother next to me. I'm the youngest of 8 children. I have 7 boys and 1 girl. We had our own chickens, our own hogs, our own cattle. We have horses, and we never had a tractor. A family farm that cut our own wood, and no electricity, no bathroom, outdoor toilet. My mother canned 700-800 quarts of food from the garden each year, and she also was a woman that was very special. My friend told me one time that he said, when you walk in your mother's kitchen, she makes you feel like you're the most important person on earth.
Yeah, yeah.
And that young man went on to be the president and the CPO of the Ford Motor Company.
It's amazing where we meet people when we're young and we don't know what in the world as they get older.
What they're going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Harold Poling, they call him Red Poling.
Yeah.
He had red hair.
I remember him, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were that age, what did you think you were going to do when you grew up?
Well, my goal in life, I pretty much lived what I dreamed I would be. I always either wanted to be a forest ranger or an engineer. And I ended up as a licensed professional engineer with my own business.
Yeah.
And had a partner, but and I wanted to be married and have a family and my own home, and live the American dream.
Yeah.
I guess. Have my own business. I wanted to have my own business. All those things came to pass.
Yeah. So when was the last time you were down in the Clifton area?
It was last Memorial Day. We went by the cemetery of Clifton where my parents are buried, and by the Fairfax Memorial Park where my wife is buried. And that was last Memorial Day.
Well, it sure has changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, in 1940. Fairfax County had 40,000 population, and you can well imagine what it is today.
Yeah.
Millions and millions, but no, I went to a consolidated high school in the city of Fairfax High School. My early years was at Clifton Elementary School. And but I graduated from Clifton Elementary School in 1939, and went on to Fairfax and graduated in 1943. Joined the Navy when I was 17, and mainly so I wouldn't be drafted into the Army.
You wanted a choice, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right.
So let's talk about your Navy time. I mean, so you're a veteran. So what did you do in the Navy?
Well, when I first joined, it was interesting that I joined in June, and I wasn't sworn in, but they took my physical, but they had no barracks. So many boys joined the Navy for the same reason as I did in '43, and we didn't have barracks for us. So, but in the end of end of July, around the 28th of July in 1943, I went to boot camp at Great Lakes, Illinois. And after boot camp, I had a choice of general sea duty, submarine duty, or armed guard. Now, I really didn't know what the armed guard was, but what it was when they put the naval gun crews aboard merchant ships to guard against submarines if they surfaced. And from there, from Great Lakes, I went to gunnery school in Louisiana, Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And once I was through gunnery school, I was sent to the Armed Guard base in New Orleans, Louisiana. And where I went to more on-hands gunnery schools. We went to Shell Beach, Louisiana, where we shot the guns out into the Gulf of Mexico. And but I was assigned a merchant ship that had turned into, it was a Danish ship that had turned into American port when Germany invaded Denmark. The MV Leonalis was the name of it, and it actually flew a Panamanian flag. That was because they could get cheaper. Merchant unions in Panama paid less than they did if they was American ship, and but we ran the first trip out of New Orleans. We went formed a convoy in the Gulf of Mexico with tankers out of Galveston, Texas, and our first place was Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That's where we were going. We were in the first night out, we ran into a storm, a tropical storm, and that was quite an experience on the first night out. I was worried about the ship staying together. It was riveted, and you could hear riveted cracking and groaning.
Amazing how you still remember those things, isn't it?
That's right. But anyway, the storm passed, and we had come past the Keys in Florida, and between that and Havana, Cuba, and we got out into the Atlantic, western Atlantic, and part of the convoy turned north, the tankers, to bring gasoline up the coast to cities like New York and Philadelphia and Boston, and we went to the Straits and to go into Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And we were attacked. The convoy was attacked by 4 German submarines, and but we had the sub-chasers escort and destroyer escorts that went into action and drove the submarines down to the bottom, and so they could run quiet. They cut the engines and set on the bottom. But they got the depth charges. But the skipper of the airship, of the Danish ship, figured where they were dropping depth charges was just off our port side, too close for comfort to suit him, and he broke convoy and opened the ship flank speed and headed for safe haven at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. But during that run, the flank speed, he cracked one of the pistons. So we had to lay over in Guantanamo Bay, and they welded the piston, but the well was too high to cover the head. There wasn't enough compression room. So they ground it down, but when they ground it down, the piston, the well wouldn't hold. So then they sent to Havana, to get a thicker head gasket. Each head of that engine was separate. It wasn't one head like an automobile. It was each piston had its own head. So they were able to raise the head of it to clear the piston. And we left there and went into Panama Canal on the eastern. We didn't go through the canal. We went to the eastern side of it. But the ship said we were supposed to go to the next day on another convoy that was also attacked by submarines. But we went into to Panama Bay. Into the Panama Canal. I forget what the name of that town is. There's two towns on the eastern side and two on the western side. I don't remember that, but from there we went to Colombia, to a city in Colombia that housed the families of the geographical engineers that were getting oil out of Venezuela. And the families lived in the rich section of this town, and what we cared was everything that you couldn't buy in the States that we took to them, like women's perfume and goods that they needed to live with. And we took trucks to supposedly to the weathermen, but they were also listeners to try to pick up who was supplying the submarines in the Gulf of Mexico. And they thought it was and they proved to be true, was Argentina was supplying the submarines with oil, drinking water, and all the supplies that they needed for the crew. But they also had these PBMs that flew out of Puerto Rico to try to spot they pick it up on radar. They'd pick one small blob and the one big one. But when the time they got there, the little one was gone. The submarine had dived, and but they were getting close to them. So because if they caught them in the act, they could shoot the Argentina. But Argentina, of course, was a neutral country. Yep. But anyway, we made that trip, and two more. In the fall of '43, the submarines were still operating in that territory. But then in the spring of '44, we never encountered any more submarines. And I made 3 trips out of New Orleans there until June of 1944. And they also, the interesting thing on that ship, the officer, we had an American officer and 6 enlisted men, 6 or 7, We had a signalman, a coxsman, a boatswain mate, and I was the gunner's mate. He said, as fast as you pass these tests, I will promote you. I was a seaman second class when I went aboard. I had just been promoted from boot seaman or third class seaman to second class seaman. So I took the first class seaman test, and it was about 10 chapters, and the final, and so he put me to the first class seaman. So I said, well, I'll go to the next grade was third class petty officer, but the only thing that I could strike for was the gunner's mate. That's how I become a gunner's mate, because I had the signalman and we had a boatswain mate. So I took the third and the second class test. So I passed. I had 3 tests, but he didn't realize that you had that waiting period between each thing.
You just did it, boom, 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 right?
Right. So he said, well, you know, when you finish this one, we're going to have to stop. He said, the rate you going, you're going to have my job before this trip is over. So when we got back to port, which is New Orleans, he went to the personnel offices to get my promotions official, made official, because they said you can't do it. But he was also a civilian lawyer, and they had made him an officer at the beginning of the war. But he, like he said, the lawyer part of him took over, and he argued my case. And I ended up as a third class gunner's mate. But so then the ship was declared unseaworthy. In South America, we were coming out of the Medellin River. It was in the spring of the year, and it was flood stage. And the skipper didn't want to wait for the pilot in a tug. He had to have a pilot, but he didn't want to wait for the tug. He wanted to get to sea before dark. Well, a log had jammed the rudder, and when he tried to maneuver, turn the ship around, headed downstream, he ended up on the beach. He run ashore, but one of the first mates dropped the anchors. He saw what was happening and dropped the anchors, and he actually was able to pull himself off the bank with the anchors, cranking him. So, but he ended up had to get a tug to get him back on the course, and they bent the bottom of the ship up. So we went into the dry dock in Birmingham, Alabama, on the last trip. And they declared the ship unseaworthy because of that piston and the bend in the bottom of the ship, and it needed other repairs. But of course they couldn't get the parts for it because Germany was still in Denmark, and so they had to mothball the ship. So then they put me ashore in the base to pick up another ship. But the only time I ever volunteered for anything, one morning I went to call to the muster in the morning. They wanted volunteers for electric hydraulic school in Washington Navy Yard. Of course, that's close to home, so I volunteered. But so we all gathered there in the Navy Yard, and the school was only needed about 40 people, but about 200 showed up. So they sent us, they only took the ones with the highest grade, and I didn't make that cut. So they sent me to Dahlgren, Virginia, the Naval Proving Grounds. for 3 months in the summer of 44. Now, once I got through the school at Dahlgren, which got a lot of good, valuable information about the guns that I'd be firing on the next ship. So they again, when I finished the school, they gave me a choice. I could either go back to submarines, general sea duty, or this time they gave me the choice of attack transport or attack cargo ship. Now what those ships were, they were used in the Pacific. They sent me from Dahlgren, Virginia to Seattle, Washington, and they signed me to that ship right there, the ship right behind you. It's the APA, Auxiliary Personnel Attack, what it stands for. And we picked that up in Astoria, Oregon. And on I went aboard on the 14th of October 1944. And the next day I turned 19 years old. When I turned 18, on the way to Mississippi to do what I said before. But then we went up and down the coast of west coast of the United States, picking up ammunition, picking up personnel, testing all of our equipment, and what they call a shakedown cruise. And on New Year's Eve of 1944, I ended up in San Diego, California, and the next day we left there and went to Pearl Harbor. And from Pearl Harbor, on the way to Pearl Harbor, this new ship, the lining around the main shaft, the ship sprung a leak. So we had to go and dry dock there and to have that repaired. Otherwise, we'd probably go into the battle at what was the battle before Okinawa? Iwo Jima. We were probably going with Iwo Jima, but because of the delay, we went into the invasion of Okinawa. Now in Okinawa, that sheet that I just showed you, we shot down a Japanese kamikaze plane. We were there 2 weeks. We went into April 1st, which was Easter Sunday, 1945. And we were there until the 14th of April. And about halfway along that period, we were called to GQ at 3 o'clock in the morning. And my duty was at that time was on the bridge, on the battery of 20 millimeters. And my job was to see that they were loaded correctly, that the captain was wired on the intercom, and I also had to check the magazine, make sure that everything was in order to fire the gun. Now the assistant gunner also had the duty that morning, and before I did that, he told me, he said, when you finish your normal duties, report back here. I need your help to help spot for me. And the gunner also had a big, wide helmet to cover the earphones. And he could only see one way. So he told me to watch the stern of the ship, and he would watch the bow of the ship to pick up any enemy planes coming in. And we were under code red, which meant that you fire at anything you see in the sky. So he gave me his binoculars, and I was watching the stern of the ship, and we were circling counterclockwise. The whole convoy of ships was circling. We'd go out at night and circle to be a harder target. And I wasn't watching more than 10 to 15 minutes, and lo and behold, 2 planes crossed the path of the moon. It so happened at that time it was dead astern. So I told the gunnery officers, I said, 2 bogies just passed the path of the moon and dead astern. And he said, range. He asked me the range. Well, I didn't. He wanted me to tell him the yardage. I didn't know the yardage, but I knew that the largest gun that we had on the ship was a 538. And I told him, I said, within range of the 538. So he pushed the button on his intercom and said, 538, enemy planes, bogies, dead astern. If 538 began firing, we're ready. Well, it wasn't more than 2 seconds. That gun fired, so the gun crew on that 538 had seen those planes also, and had gotten zeroed in on it. Loaded the gun, of course, was already loaded, and that fired. But as far as I know, it didn't hit anything. So the gunner also turned to me and he said, "Where are they?" And I said, "Well, one of them is right there." Right off the stern of our ship was that kamikaze. And so he pushed his button down. The 40 millimeter was our next size gun. He repeated his position and told the 40 to begin firing when ready. And they also had picked it up. And same thing down to the 20 millimeter. But that plane flew along the starboard side of the ship. Now, the day before, we were unloading number 2 hatch. The hatch was loaded filled with 500 pounds and 1,000 pound aerial bombs. And they had taken part of them off, but they didn't cover the hatch when we were circling. So that pilot was on like a thing coming on the starboard side, and how that plane kept flying with all that flak hitting him. We would shoot at the bow of the ship because he was supposed to carry the airplane, because he was supposed to carry the explosives in that bow, so when he drove it, flew it into the ship, it would do more damage. But this one, obviously, the powder was wet, or it didn't have anything in it. But then the Japanese pilot, saw that open hatch, because he tried to fly the plane into that hatch. He made it hard, turned it up on the wing of the left wing, and he hit the rudder to turn it into the hole. And up front of the ship, we had a quad 40 and a twin 40 was on the director to control. And when he turned into that try to get in that hole, he had to fly down the barrel of those 6 barrels. He didn't make it. One of those shells went through the windshield and killed him. And you could tell the minute he got hit, because the plane neutralized itself, because the wind blowing over the ailerons and the rudder, straightened it up and leveled it up. And how that plane got through the superstructure, I'll never know. But it didn't hit anything, and the boy by the name of Vandenberg was on the director, firing on a pedestal, firing the director, firing a gun with that through the director and the Mark 14 sight. He said he could reach up and touch that plane. That's how low it was. But when the plane hit the water, just because it hit one wing first and spun it around and actually rubbed the side of the ship, or the ship rubbed the side of the planes, really. And because he went on down, so we won the battle of that particular fight. And I don't know if that plane, we got credit for the shooting down the plane at Okinawa, and then the ship was also equipped with doctors and sick bay, a large sick bay. So we were actually, would pick up wounded personnel from Marines, Army, Navy, anyone that needed to be brought back aboard the ship and put in the sick bay. And when we got the sick bay filled, which was again about 2 weeks, we came back to Saipan, and we dropped some of off in the hospital in Saipan, and from there we headed back to the States to resupply the ship, with ammunition and food. The ship had a 10,000-mile range, and across Pacific, 6,000 miles each way, so we needed to get supplies. So, but we came back to where we got ammunition out of Seattle, Washington, on an island. I can't remember the name of the island, but we loaded with ammunition, and we worked our way down the coast, picked up the personnel, discharged some personnel, and we also had to go into dry dock to get rid of the barnacles that had formed on the bottom of the ship, so that you wouldn't, get better speed. And then we went back to Pearl Harbor and picked up a load of Seabees, and we took them back into Okinawa, and then we were headed back to get another load. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, they called the ship to GQ, General Quarters, and we were just outside of Guam. And the scuttlebutt was that the war was ended. So sure enough, the small boat came out and directed us into Guam. And we followed suit, and the time we got into Guam was about daybreak. Man, they were squirting water and whistles blowing the end of the war, unofficially. And so then we picked up the 1st Marines and took them, headed for Japan. And we were not in sight distance, but in close proximity to Missouri when they signed the peace treaty. But then we went into Tokyo Bay. There was 5 transports and one KA cargo ship, and the rest was all bottle wagons, carriers, Australian and British, all the Allied countries was there. And the next day, that evening, we could look up on the mountain and see the white flags at the gun emplacements. And so the next morning, the Marines were unloaded at the naval base, for Tokyo, and it's Yokosuka Naval Base, I think was the name of it. And but I had told my superior, I said, I'd hate to have come all that distance and not be able to put my foot aboard land in Japan. So he said, well, I'll look into that and see what I can do for you. So after we unloaded the troops, he got us a small boat, landing craft, which the ship carried to take the troops ashore. And I got to go with instructions not to leave the base, the naval base. So we went into, it was 5 of us, went into the naval base and we went through the buildings looking for some Murray swords, but we wasn't successful. And he came down, and the peddler, the first guy that you meet was a peddler. And we were taking candy bars and cigarettes, cigars, trading material to get the Japanese money, which would only be good for a short period of time. So we got us some money, and when lunchtime came, there was a little store there that a little shopping center right near the base, on the base. And there was a general store, a barber shop, and a clothing store, and we went into the grocery store and got bread and sandwich meat, and I asked for relish, and they couldn't figure out what relish was. And so they went back and got the manager, and then he did bring me a jar of relish. So we sat out on the porch and ate our lunch, and one more even when we got him a haircut. But we sat there and looked, and we said, is this all that it's going to be? but MacArthur hadn't arrived yet. So is that thing that I gave you stated that we landed actually before MacArthur.
Yeah.
But then we came back to, once we unloaded them, and we came back to the States again. Now take it back, we picked up the troops and brought them back to the States, brought them back to San Diego, and then we were in the Magic Carpet, bringing the troops back, and I was discharged in March, by 28th, the end of March of 1946.
Well, what happened then?
Well, I got out of the Navy, I was discharged in Norfolk, Shell Beach, which is not Shell Beach, but Camp Shelton in the Norfolk area. And first they sent me to Philadelphia because I was sworn in D.C. And so they said I should go to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. But when I got there, they wanted to know where I lived, and I told them Clifton, Virginia. They said, well, you're supposed to be in Norfolk. So they sent me to Norfolk.
That sounds like the government, doesn't it?
That's right, yeah. And down there, they sent me one place at the Navy Yard in Norfolk, and my orders to Camp Shelton, which was the place where the APA operated out of the amphibians. That's the amphibian base. So once I got out, I was stayed in the reserve. I went back into the reserve for 4 years, signed up, but during the Korean War, they extended me for an extra year. So I had a little less than 3 years in the full. I signed up to the end of the war plus 6 months. And then I was in the reserve until I had a full almost 8 years total in active duty in the reserve. But that's what it was. When I got out of the service, I went to school on the GI Bill at Columbia Tech, and I went on to, I got a job as a surveyor for an engineering firm in Arlington, Virginia, the Lashman Associates. And I went to school sometimes during the day and sometimes full time and sometimes at night. And but then I went from there to work for the Lashman. Went to school until that was 1946 when I went to work for the Lashman. And then 1949. I decided to go to the construction portion of that. I was a field engineer on the job for Stone and Webster, building a power plant in Alexandria, Virginia. So, but the only problem with that, when the job is over, you have to go to another job. So the next job that they offered me was either Toronto, Canada, or Glasgow, Scotland. And I had worked my way up from rod and chainman there, into a junior field engineer or instrument man to a party chief or a field engineer. But and it paid good money, but I didn't want to travel that much. And so then I went to work for a construction company that built commercial buildings, reinforced concrete, high-rise buildings. And then once that job was finished, I went to work for a company in McLean, Virginia, building houses. And I worked there until I worked my way from an engineer, field engineer, up to more of a supervisor capacity. I went to work for another house building firm as a superintendent, but that job was a very demanding job. I was married, and we had one son at that time, and I was working 60 and 70 hours a week. So I decided to go back into the design section of that engineering work that we did, which was everything outside the building. We did all the field, the site work. So I went to work for Fairfax County for 18 months. And learned a lot, how to design storm sewer, sanitary sewer, design roads, design work for schools and county jobs, and but after about 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years, I was offered a job with a private firm, Carroll Chemical Associates in Springfield, Virginia, and I worked a while in the field, but then they brought me inside to do a floodplain study that I had learned to do at the county. And once that job was thing, I asked to go back in the field because I liked to work in the field. But he said, no, I'm not going to do that. You're too valuable for me in the office. So that was, make a long story short, I worked as a design section. I was the third man. And the other people over me either went in business for themselves or were transferred to we had an office in Fredericksburg, Virginia, too. And I worked my way up till I was, shortly after I came in the office, they made me the field manager, where I took the work orders, dealt with the clients, and scheduled the work in the field. But then as time went by, I became the only design section, did all the design, and then I was made the office manager. But once that job, 7 years I worked there, and then in 1965, my partner, Don Moore, and I went into business for ourselves as servers, 3A and 3B. You know, the one servers can't do special design, but they can use state standards and things of that type. But so shortly after going into business, our business grew, and then I realized that either he or I had to get an engineer's license, which is not always easy to do, and without a regular college degree. I had a technical school where I went to, but so anyway, once I got approved for that, I got my engineer's license, and we had a growing business, but we stayed small. Very, very good, very active. We stayed, had lots of work. I usually kept our same clients until 1988. And by 23 years, they decided to retire. So I retired, and then in the early 90s, I went back to my firm as I didn't really join the firm. I sold my share of the company, and the company still goes on today. They call it Land Development Consultants, Inc. And but I did some work on my own after I retired. But my wife and I lived in when we first got married. We lived in Arlington, an apartment for 2 years. And then we lived in McLean, and our first house was on the job that I was working on for 2 years. And then we moved to a house in Falls Church for 30 years. And then we moved to Front Royal in 1986 and lived there for 30-some, same house on Richmond Road that we stayed for until my wife died in 2006. From Parkinson's disease, and I lived on there until I moved here. I've been here about a year and a half, maybe 2 years in September, and we sold the house. My son, we had 2 sons, and my son that lives in Maryland took the selling of the house here last March. And so that's pretty much the story of briefly, my life.
Yeah, well.
There's a lot of things in between, but that's...
Yeah. Well, let's go back just a little bit. Tell us about how you met your wife, because you were a busy man or a busy boy working. So how did you meet your wife?
How to meet my wife?
Yeah.
That's an interesting story. I lived in the boarding house in the Kenmore Inn in Arlington, and Mrs. Jacobs ran the things. She catered to school teachers, and but she passed away in 1949, and she had an apartment all her own. Now these 2 women moved into that apartment. They come here from California, and I met one of them. She moved here because she was engaged to a sailor that was an officer on the ship in Norfolk, and her girlfriend was extremely pretty. And Eleanor, my wife's name was Charlotte, and her girlfriend was Eleanor. Eleanor wanted to go to the airport to fly out to Norfolk to see her boyfriend. So she asked me what was the best way to do that. I said, well, you can go ahead right in front of the boarding house and catch a bus, or you can catch a cab. And the third way would be if you introduce me to your girlfriend, I'll drive you over.
She caught your eye, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. She's absolutely beautiful. And we did that, and got Charlotte. We went out on a few dates, and but at that time I liked to go to dances, and I drank probably more than I should. And so Charlotte she didn't like to dance, and she didn't want to be around drinking because her father was an alcoholic. So she wouldn't date me. And so one of her friends asked her, said, "What happened to you and Art?" She said, "Well, he's a nice boy, but he drives too fast and he drinks too much." so
your drinking days were over, right?
So that's right. So anyway, I was engaged to another girl that I went to high school with, and that didn't work out. So that was in 1950, and my friend that I worked with was a Navy pilot, and I had introduced him to Charlotte's. Actually, it was the landlady's daughter, and she and Charlotte became good friends. And after Eleanor got married, and he wanted to take his bride-to-be over to Maryland to visit some friends that he had there to meet his girlfriend. So we had to go by her house that Saturday morning, and I stayed out in the car, and he went inside because it's just going to be a few minutes. And Charlotte had also moved there with her mother. Had kind of a small room and board facility too. So Charlotte came out and wanted to know why I didn't come in. So I told her that, but it was just going to be a short time, and so she kept talking. So I said, "Well, if you're going to talk, why don't you get in and sit down?" And what she was getting at, they had invited her to go along, but she didn't have a date. So I guess she had figured that by that time I maybe had slowed down and maybe worth another try.
Yeah.
So anyway, from there we started going from time to time together, and so one night, I had just like she figured out I was there 25. And I thought it was about time for me to settle down and start my family. So I went down and picked up Charlotte. She said, "Where are we going?" I said, "I'm going to give you two choices." I said, "Do you want to go dancing or you want to get married?" And she said, "You know I don't like to dance." I said, that mean you accept?" She said, "I need to think about this." So she a couple of days later, she came back and she said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you promise me one thing, that you will back off drinking, and that you, I don't mind you taking a drink now and then, but I'm not going to put up with a drunk like my father the rest of my life." And I told her, I said, "Well, that sounds like a reasonable request to me." So I gave her my promise, and 55 years later, we were still married.
Yeah, that's great. So one more question here. Let's talk about some advice you can give some of our viewers here about making it to 98 years old, and I know you're going to make it to 100. So, what's your life? What kind of advice can you give young people today?
Well, of course, the genes are probably a lot of it. My father was 95, and my mother was 61 when she died, and but I had a brother who lives to be 102. He also was an engineer, and my brother, one was 97 and just died a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and one was 91, and one was 78, and one was Manuel was probably, he was in the 60s, I guess, 67, 68. Right? And so a lot of it is genes, a lot of it is that I like to walk. Of course, surveying, you walk, your job requires a lot of walking. And stay active, stay busy, try to stay fresh, stress-free. I think stress is probably the worst thing to deal with. I always said the most you can get out of life is contentment. And but I still walk to this day. Every chance that I can get from here, I walk. Yesterday, I walked the day before, and I used to walk about a mile and more each day. And I walk here, and I weigh the same, within 4 pounds of what I weighed in high school. And I think a lot of it is contentment that helps you to live a long life, and I've always been very fortunate in having good bosses to give me a chance to show what I can do. I had a good wife, had 2 good children. I tried to teach my children right. My wife and I did teach our children right from wrong. So we had, and I have good daughter-in-laws. So many things that I've been very fortunate in having, but to tell you the truth, probably the best thing that you can do is to take care of yourself, because in this day and time, your medical, I wouldn't be here probably 50 years ago. I had a heart attack that I survived, had 3 stents put in. I've had a new heart valve put in. I've had my brain operated on because the brain was leading from taking Plavix. Too much blood thinner plus the aspirin was too much, and it at 2 places of my brain was leaking, and they did it microscopically. The way they cauterized my brain, they stopped the bleeding, and that took a while to get recovered from. It's so many things that all come together in my life that has been very fortunate. Like I say, good people that taught me things. And every time that I felt that I was extremely fortunate in having around me, it is. Any one particular thing, I don't know that could keep me alive, but all those things combined.
Well, you've lived an interesting life, Arthur, and you've made it through 2 wars, 3 wars.
Right, yeah, I did. And, I was very fortunate in World War. I also was 5 of us in during World War II, and plus my brother-in-law. And I had good parents. My parents dedicated their lives to raising children on the farm. You at a very early age, you had to help to put things. You had chores to do. You milk the cows, feed the horses, chickens, hogs. Our parents. You had parents 24 hours a day, and I contributed that a lot to your general attitude in life. I feel that be able to do the things that I dreamed of. Actually, when the last trip that we made on the ship, I'd go up in the bow of the ship, and then I said, man, I got to decide how I'm going to live my life. And I decided I wanted to get out of the service, but I was standing up in the bow with the wind blowing in my face, and then I made my plans how I was going to live. So and to be able to do that, and enjoy your life, enjoy your work, how could you ask for more?
Arthur, I appreciate you taking time and talking with me today. It's been very enjoyable.
Right.
All right. And we'll see you back on your 100th birthday. How's that? We'll meet you out on the walking path out here.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Arthur. Really appreciate it.
Well, you're certainly welcome.